Imagine for a second that you're standing in Buenos Aires in the year 1900. You're in one of the 10 richest cities on planet Earth. The streets are lined with French architecture that rivals Paris. The opera house is grander than anything in New York. Argentinians are richer, on average, than Germans, Italians, and the Spanish combined. This isn't some oil-rich desert kingdom. This is a real economy. Argentina has more arable land than France. It exports the best beef, the finest wheat, and wines that win awards in Europe. The Argentine peso? It's as good as gold. Literally. It's backed by gold reserves. Now fast forward to 2001. You walk into the Casa Rosada, the pink presidential palace. The phones are ringing off the hook. The IMF is screaming on line 1. Angry mobs are smashing bank windows on the streets below. The military is on standby. Every Argentine's bank account has been frozen by the government. Welcome to Argentina, the only country in history that successfully went from the first world to the third world without ever passing through the second. This is the story of 5 bankruptcies, 100 years of economic suicide, and the question nobody wants to answer: how do you bankrupt a country that has everything? To understand Argentina's tragic story, we need to go back to the beginning, to the Golden Age. In the 1880s, Argentina was quite literally a miracle. The endless Pampas plains, some of the most fertile land on Earth, were perfect for raising cattle and growing wheat. Immigrants from Europe were flooding in. Italians, Spanish, Germans, British, all of them looking for a new life, and Argentina was offering them a golden opportunity. The country followed liberal economic policies: free trade, foreign investment, open borders, British capital, built railroads, ports, and meatpacking plants. Argentina was the unofficial 6th dominion of Great Britain, in the same league as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. By 1913, Argentina surpassed France, Germany, and Italy in GDP per capita. Buenos Aires was called the Paris of South America, and it wasn't just marketing hype, it really was. The streets were lit with electricity. The subte was Latin America's first subway system. Argentinians consumed more meat per capita than anyone on the planet. Wealthy families spent their summers in Paris. The country's literacy rate was higher than Spain's. Economists predicted that Argentina would catch up to the United States by 1950, but then things started to go wrong. In 1929, the Great Depression hit. Global trade collapsed. Argentina's beef and wheat exports plummeted. Prices crashed. Unemployment rose. But here's the thing. Every country was affected by the Great Depression. The United States, Germany, Britain, they all suffered, but most countries recovered. Argentina didn't. Why? Because in 1930, something happened that would forever change Argentina's trajectory: its first military coup. And it started a tradition, a bad tradition. Over the next 60 years, Argentina would experience 6 more military coups. The military began acting like a referee in politics. Didn't like a government? Overthrow it. Economy getting tough? Take control. But worse was coming, because in 1946, the most iconic and destructive figure in Argentine history would take the stage: Juan Domingo Perón. When Juan Perón became president in 1946, he was a popular hero. He was charismatic. He was a man of the people, and his wife Eva Perón, Evita, was beloved among the poor, almost like a saint. Here's what Perón did. First, he nationalized the railroads. He bought them from the British. The result? Efficiency plummeted. Trains broke down. The system began to rot. Second, he nationalized the central bank. Now there was no independent monetary policy. The government could print money whenever it wanted, and it did. Third, he raised wages and social spending. Workers got more money, but where was this money coming from? Not from productivity, from printing money. Fourth, he restricted imports. He followed an import substitution policy, meaning, let's produce everything in Argentina, let's not be dependent on the outside world. Sounds good, but in real life it meant inefficiency. Argentine firms became lazy and inefficient without facing global competition. In the short term, it looked great. Workers were happy. The economy seemed to be growing. But in reality, Argentina was living a Ponzi scheme. You were printing money, not creating wealth. And by the mid-1950s, the bills started coming due. Inflation rose, the peso depreciated, foreign investors fled, exports collapsed, budget deficits exploded, and in 1956, for the first time in history, Argentina couldn't pay its debt. The first default, the first bankruptcy. But this was just the beginning. The period from 1956 to 1982 is pure chaos. Argentina swung back and forth between military dictatorships and weak democratic governments. Each new government tried to reverse the policies of the previous one, but none could solve the core problem. Argentina was spending more than it was producing. Inflation became a part of Argentine life, 20% in the 1960s, over 300% by the early 1980s. Prices were rising so fast that supermarkets repriced twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. People spent their salaries as soon as they got them, because tomorrow the same thing would cost more. And in 1976, a military junta took power. The dirty war began. Thousands were kidnapped, tortured, and killed. But economically, the military government didn't fix things. In fact, they made them worse. The junta borrowed massively, doubling the foreign debt. And then in 1982, they did something stupid. They invaded the Falkland Islands. You know what happened. Great Britain sent the Royal Navy. Argentina lost. The military junta was humiliated. The regime collapsed. And the economy? It was in ruins. In 1982, Argentina defaulted again, the second bankruptcy. By the late 1980s, Argentina entered hyperinflation hell. In 1989, inflation exceeded 3,000%. Yes, 3,000%. Prices were doubling every month. When you went to buy bread, by the time you got to the register, the price had already changed. People ran to the supermarket as soon as they got their salaries. Banknotes were so worthless that people started hoarding dollars and food instead of cash. In 1989, people took to the streets. Looting began. Supermarkets were ransacked. The government declared a state of emergency. President Raúl Alfonsín resigned months before his term was up. The country was out of control. And then a savior arrived, Carlos Menem. Menem proposed a radical plan. Peg the peso to the US dollar. 1 peso equals $1. A fixed exchange rate. No money printing. Budget discipline. And surprisingly, it worked. For a while, inflation dropped. The economy stabilized. The 1990s felt like a renaissance for Argentina. Foreign investment returned. Companies were privatized. Buenos Aires looked like a shining city again. But it was an illusion, because pegging the peso to the dollar created a massive trap. When the fixed exchange rate plan convertibility started in 1991, it looked like a miracle. Inflation dropped from 3,000% to 4%. The economy grew. People started planning for the future again. But there was a problem, a big problem. Argentina couldn't devalue its own currency. And in the late 1990s, everything reversed. In 1997, the Asian financial crisis hit. In 1998, Russia defaulted. In 1999, Brazil, Argentina's biggest trading partner, devalued its own currency. Suddenly, Argentine goods were expensive. Exports collapsed. But Argentina couldn't devalue the peso, so what did it do? It borrowed more debt. The government borrowed billions from the IMF, the World Bank, and private banks to cover the deficits. By 2001, Argentina was carrying $160 billion in foreign debt. That was over 60% of GDP, and nobody wanted to lend anymore. In September 2001, the government restricted cash withdrawals from banks, a measure called Corralito. People could only withdraw $250 per week from their own money. The public went insane. People took to the streets with spoons and pots, shouting, "Que se vayan todos," they all must go. On December 19, 2001, Buenos Aires turned into a battlefield. Police opened fire on protesters. More than 30 people died. President Fernando de la Rúa resigned and fled by helicopter. Within 2 weeks, Argentina had 5 different presidents. 5. On December 27, 2001, the new interim president made a historic announcement. Argentina would not be able to pay $93 billion of its debt. It was the largest sovereign default in history up to that point. The third bankruptcy. In early 2002, Argentina abandoned the convertibility system. The peso was floated, and it collapsed. Within a day, the peso lost 75% of its value against the dollar. Within weeks, it was 3 pesos $1. Argentinians lost 2/3 of their savings. The middle class was wiped out. But then something strange happened. The economy started to recover. Why? The cheap peso made Argentine exports competitive. Soybean, beef, and wheat prices were rising, thanks to the commodity supercycle. China was buying massive amounts of soybeans from Argentina. In 2003, Néstor Kirchner became president. 2007 was another renaissance period for Argentina. The economy grew 8 to 9%. Unemployment fell. Kirchner and his wife Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, president 2007-2015, were seen as heroes. But here's the thing, nothing fundamental had changed. The government was printing money again. The government was spending again. The government was following populist policies again. And by the early 2010s, the story was starting to repeat. In 2014, Argentina fell into selective default. Cristina Kirchner's second term was a disaster. Inflation exceeded 25% again. The peso was out of control. And in 2020, surprise, surprise, Argentina defaulted again. During COVID-19, it had to restructure $65 billion of debt, the fifth bankruptcy. In 2015, Mauricio Macri, a businessman president, was elected. This time will be different, he said. Market reforms, foreign investment, fiscal responsibility. But guess what happened? In 2018, the peso collapsed again. Macri had to borrow $57 billion from the IMF, the largest loan in IMF history. And in 2019, Alberto Fernandez, Cristina Kirchner's former vice president, became president. Cristina returned as vice president. The Peronists were back in power. And in 2020, surprise, surprise, Argentina defaulted again. During COVID-19, it had to restructure $65 billion of debt. The fifth bankruptcy. So the real question is why? Why can't Argentina break this cycle? The answer is complex, but it can be boiled down to two words: Peronism and populism. Peronism is embedded in Argentina's political DNA. Every political party identifies itself as somewhat Peronist. Why? Because Peronism wins votes. Peronism says the state will protect you, the state will give you jobs, the state will take from the rich and give to you. Sounds nice, but the result is massive public spending, uncontrollable budget deficits, money printing, inflation, capital flight, lack of investment, default, and the cycle starts again. Argentina never accepts the painful economic reforms: cutting subsidies, political suicide, privatizing state companies, betrayal, balancing the budget, protecting the rich. Every president comes in with short-term populist policies. They postpone problems to the next generation, and the next generation repeats the same mistake. Beyond the data, there's a real human cost. Imagine being Argentine. You can't plan your life. Will you be able to retire in 10 years? Who knows? Maybe your pension fund went bankrupt. Planning to buy a house? Good luck. Getting a mortgage is nearly impossible. Argentinians can't save because the peso loses 50% of its value every year. If you're educated, you leave the country. Argentina has the biggest brain drain in Latin America. Doctors, engineers, programmers, they all go to Spain, the US, Chile. Those who stay, they're just trying to survive. So can Argentina be saved? Theoretically, yes. But practically, very difficult. What Argentina needs is an independent central bank, strict fiscal discipline, real free market reforms, investment in education, rule of law, avoiding populism. But that requires political suicide. No politician wants to do it. Argentina is stuck in a fiscal Groundhog Day. Every 10-15 years, the same crisis, the same default, the same inflation, the same promises, the same disappointment. Simon Kuznets, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, famously said, there are 4 types of countries in the world: developed, developing, Japan, and Argentina. Argentina is the only country that goes backwards. As you watch Argentina head toward its 6th default, as you see the peso lose another 0, as you hear politicians say this time will be different, ask yourself, is this incompetence, or is the system working exactly as designed? I want to hear from you in the comments, especially those of you living in high-debt countries. Does Argentina's story sound familiar? If you want to understand how housing bubbles destroy economies, check out our video on Spain's real estate apocalypse. And if you don't want your portfolio to pull in Argentina, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next economic disaster.